Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We have about another minute here before the scheduled start time, so I will hold off for just a moment before we get rolling. But thank you all for coming. I hope everyone's safe and doing well, and I appreciate you being here with me today. All right, it's 11 o'clock, so we'll get started. Again, welcome. Today, we're going to be taking a look at what to expect during your audit, specifically of the Annex A controls in ISO 27001. My name is John Laffey, and I am the Information Security Program Manager at PJR. Before we begin, a few notes. All participants have been muted for call clarity. The slides from this presentation will be available at pjr.com under the training link. From there, you can find another link that says past webinar slides, and those should be up within 24 hours of the completion of this broadcast. Additionally, a recording of this webinar, as well as all of our past webinars, will be available for review on YouTube. You can simply search for Perry Johnson Registrars. You'll find our channel and all of our previously recorded webinars that we've done across many different standards and subject matter. Check them out. They're free. They're great resources for information, and we encourage you to take advantage. All right, so today what we're going to look at, we're quickly going to talk about Annex A and its purpose and use in regards to the standard. Additionally, we're going to talk about the statement of applicability and its role during your audit as well as in your system at large. And then we're going to look at a couple different sample controls from Annex A, and we're going to kind of build out some example policies and procedures that might be created in relation to them, and then run through, what are the realistic expectations of what an auditor would expect to see while they're on site to verify that these controls have been implemented effectively. After that, I'll certainly take as much time as necessary to respond to any questions that you may have. Feel free throughout the presentation to go ahead and pose any questions in the questions tab of your GoToWebinar applet. And at the end, I will open those up and make sure that I respond to any and all questions that you may have. All right, let's jump right in. Annex A, reference, control objectives, and controls. So as you may or may not know, Annex A is a table in the standard. It contains controls and control objectives, and it's to be used when determining the necessary controls for your information security management system. There are 114 of these controls grouped into 14 different categories. These controls cover everything from the organization of policies to physical security to network security and encryption, amongst others. And this table is a great reference when you're conducting your risk assessment to ensure you're considering all possible risks that may be applicable to your organization's ISMS, your information assets, and your systems. That is to say, if you're looking at a particular information asset and trying to determine what are some potential threats or risks that may apply to it, if you go to the back of the standard in Annex A, there's 144 controls that you can kind of work backwards from and say, okay, does this control address a potential risk to something that we have in our organization? The statement of applicability is the document that it lists all of the controls in Annex A. And you're also required by the standard to include a justification on whether or not each control has been included or excluded from your system, as well as the current status of implementation. Keep in mind that the statement of applicability can contain additional controls beyond what is in Annex A. However, all of the controls in Annex A must be documented at a minimum. But that is to say that if your organization feels that there's controls that aren't documented in Annex A that could help you or apply to you, feel free to go ahead and add those in. We don't want Annex A to limit the number of controls you apply to your system and your organization. Additionally, though it's not required by the standard, it can also be helpful to include a reference describing how the control has been implemented. And on the next slide here, I have a snippet of an example of what a statement of applicability might look like, and it includes a reference to the implementation. So let's take a look at that. So in this example, you can see this is just showing 3 controls from section A.8. And we have 4 columns here: the control itself, the inclusion justification, the implementation status, and an exclusion justification. So just looking at the first row, classification of information. Yes, it's included in our system. Our justification for this particular control was the result of a risk assessment. So that is to say, during your risk assessment, you saw risks that could be addressed by having an information classification policy in place that we'll step through here in the next few slides. And then in the implementation status, you can see here in our example, yes, we've implemented it. Take a look at policy XYZ. Obviously, policy XYZ would probably have a more meaningful name in an actual situation. And similarly, you can see with the next 2 controls here in this example, they're both included as well. And it says to reference a procedure to see more information about how exactly that's being implemented. So I wanted to just take a look at the control objectives of the example controls we're looking at here. Now, these control objectives come from Annex A in the standard. So this is just copied directly from the standard itself. But A.8.2.1 says that information shall be classified in terms of legal requirements, value, criticality, and sensitivity to unauthorized disclosure or modification. A.8.2.2 talks about having an appropriate set of procedures for information labeling and implemented in accordance with your scheme that you've adopted. A.8.2.3 talks about having procedures in place for handling assets in accordance with the classification scheme adopted by the organization. So let's take a little bit further look at what that actually means. So this is just an example policy and procedure. Obviously, it's not an entire policy and procedure. It's just some snippets. And again, this is not an expectation that this is how your policy and procedure should look or needs to look. This is strictly for the purposes of our webinar here to have an example to walk through. So let's assume for our example the following in regard to the 3 controls we were just talking about. The organization has a policy. They've defined 3 levels of classification: public, private, and confidential. For each of those classifications, the policy describes the characteristics of the information falling into each category, as well as gives examples of each category. The organization has a procedure for labeling and handling information based on its classification. And the procedure states that confidential and private information must be labeled as such in a watermark or header. Handling requirements include transmission, retention, encryption, authorization, and destruction requirements for each of the 3 classifications. So given that information, after verifying that a classification scheme has been adopted by the organization, you could expect your auditor to do the following: inquire who handles the more restrictive classifications of information, interview those who do, and verify that they are handling the information in accordance with the policy and procedure. Verify with system admins, where applicable, that appropriate access control is implemented with regards to restricted information, as well as encryption if and where it's needed. And then additionally, during interviews with staff and tours of office facilities, auditors will be keeping an eye out for printed materials that are unattended or can be seen by those passing by to ensure that the information is not available to unauthorized individuals when it should not be, as well as being labeled appropriately where necessary. You can additionally expect that all staff who may be randomly selected for interviews to assess awareness of the ISMS in general will be questioned about this policy. And there's a reason for that. So this policy, along with a few others, is expected to be known by all staff. Now you might have a policy or a technical procedure regarding encryption that is really only going to need to be known by the technical staff who handle that procedure. I wouldn't necessarily expect someone in sales or marketing to be able to tell me what encryption algorithms and what key lengths are required for varying, different types of information assets. But with this particular policy, it's required that all your folks are aware of it in order for it to be effective. A baseline knowledge of this policy and procedure is required so that individuals can identify the different types of information and know how to handle them. Now, again, it's not expected that all staff would have the policy memorized, but we would hope that they could show awareness of the policy and be able to identify the level of classification of the information they are currently working with. Additionally, we would expect that they could show us where they could find that policy or procedure on your system's repository or wherever you maintain your ISMS documentation. We'd like to be able to know that if they needed to, they could go reference that information to make sure that they're doing what they need to do in regards to the information they handle. All right, so we're going to look at a couple other example controls here. I just pulled a few from access control out here. So again, we'll look at the control objectives. For 9.2.1, the objective is documented as a formal user registration and deregistration process shall be implemented to enable assignment of access rights. And for 9.2.2, a formal user access provisioning process shall be implemented to assign or revoke access rights for all user types to all systems and services. So these two controls kind of go hand in hand. It's common to see a single policy or procedure that kind of addresses both of these controls. It just depends on the organization itself. I think at its root, the 9.2.1 is talking about actually creating user accounts, and 9.2.2 is more concerned with the specific permissions and rights that are assigned to those accounts. But again, it's up to you to determine how best to organize your policies and procedures to address these. However, for the purposes of our example, let's assume the following. The organization's registration and deregistration process states that all requests must be submitted to the IT department by a member of HR. New user account requests must include a name, a start date, a manager, and the position of the employee. Let's also assume that the process states that a user access request form must be filled out and submitted to IT by HR or individual's manager. The request form includes all systems the individual needs access to, as well as permission levels. So what we're looking for here, in some way or another, as an auditor, we need to be able to come in and see that there was a documented record for requests for a user account to be created or for specific rights or privileges to be assigned to a given user account. Because that's going to allow us to actually audit the effectiveness of the implementation here. So after verifying the procedure in place to add users and assign them access rights and permissions, you can expect your auditor to interview members of staff who are responsible for assigning access rights and creating new accounts to verify that they understand the procedure and what is required. You can also expect that your auditor will choose a sampling of recently hired staff and verify the necessary requests are on file and that they were approved by the required individuals. So in our example's case, there were requests that came from the HR department for new hires having accounts being created. Additionally, we're going to want to verify the permissions assigned to the sampled users match the requests on file by reviewing system configurations. So we're actually going to request to see, for example, an Active Directory, pull up a user's account, see what groups he's a member of, see what permissions have been assigned to him. Okay, at that point, we know exactly what he has access to and what permissions he has. Now let's walk that back. Now show me the ticket or the email or the user access form or whatever method your organization has adopted to document those requests. And we're going to make sure that what they have access to matches what they were requested to have access to. Now, additionally, not just for new hires, but in general, we might just pull out a few random user accounts from, I'm using Active Directory here, but it could be any system that you use. We're just going to randomly sample an appropriate number of users, take a look at what they have access to, and then walk that back and look for the record that requested that level of access for that user. Again, that is going to give us a level of assurance that your processes that you have in place are effectively being followed. And we can actually see on what date, what individual requested these levels of access for this user. And obviously, it's going to relate to some other controls as well. There's a control that talks about reviewing user access rights at regular intervals. A common thing that can happen is you have an employee that's been with you for a while, and maybe they've changed roles a few times. And as they've changed roles, they've had different access requirements. Maybe they no longer need access to this. They now need access to a different project or a different folder or a different system altogether. We want to make sure that as those changes take place, you're not just adding additional access, but you're also removing any unnecessary access. And so that's why it's so important to have these paper trails left behind. And that's also for your own purposes too. So you can do your own internal reviews and say, hey, this person has access to the finance folder and they no longer work in finance, they're in HR. Do they need access to that? Things of that nature. We always want to make sure that we're working on the privilege of least access is necessary for folks to do their work, and that includes making sure that they don't have any leftover access from maybe tasks or jobs that they no longer do. All right, so short and sweet, but again, the goal today was just to give you a better feel for when your auditor actually comes on site and they want to look at all those controls. What is that going to be like? And what I just described for those 5 example controls, you can extend that to every single control on your statement of applicability. We're going to use that like a roadmap for the audit, and we're going to go through each one during an initial audit anyway. We're going to go through each one. We're going to understand what your implementation of the control is, and then we're going to verify that it's being effectively implemented wherever possible. And whether that's interviews with folks, or review of records, or review of system configurations, that's what we'll do. But you can expect that every one of those controls will be audited during your initial certification audit in that manner. Again, thank you all for coming. I'd like to go ahead now and open the floor for questions. Let me open the tab up here, pop it out. Please feel free if you have any questions about what we just covered. Oh, let's see here from Daniel. Will a recording be made available? I was not able to connect for the first 10 minutes. Hi, Daniel. Yes, absolutely. A recording will be made available. It will be up on our YouTube channel. Like I said, probably within 24 hours. If you just search for Perry Johnson Registrars, you'll be able to find our channel, and it will have links to all of our recorded webinars, including this one. Sorry you weren't able to connect there. But again, for anyone who has any questions, please feel free at this time. All right, here we go with another one. This is from Durga. If a control is not applicable, then how should our justification be? Well, Durga, obviously it's going to depend on the control, but let me just give you an example here. There's a number of controls in the standard that relate to software development. So let's say you're an organization that doesn't develop software. It would be very simple. The justification would be our organization does not develop software. This control is not applicable to us. That's the most straightforward one I can give you. Obviously, it's going to depend on the specific control and circumstances of your ISMS. My pleasure, Durga. Thanks for coming today. If anyone else has questions, please feel free. I'm going to leave this open for a few minutes. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about this content or the standard in general. I'm here, and I am happy to answer any and all questions as best as I can. What is the difference between verification and validation of the software? This is from, I don't even want to try to say your name. I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it. But can you give me any more context to that? Is this in relation to certain controls in the standard, or is this just in general you're talking about V&V, or what specifically are you getting at there? I pull post my question later. Durga, absolutely. You can post your question later. Additionally, I'm going to put this slide back up. If you'd like, you can email me directly with any questions that you might have at jlaffey@pjr.com. Going back to the difference between verification and validation of the software and the life cycle of the software, honestly, I'm not sure what controls in the standard that specifically is referencing, and I am not a software developer by profession, so I wouldn't want to give you the wrong impression. If you have a question about a specific control, I'd be happy to answer it, but in terms of the standard and its requirements, I'm not sure what the difference between verification and validation of the software. I'm not sure what exactly that applies to, so I don't want to muddy any waters here. Sorry if I couldn't be of more help. Any other questions? Please feel free. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. All right, everyone. Well, again, you can expect to find a recording of this webinar up on our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours or so. Additionally, you can find a copy of this slide deck. It will be available on our website under training and past webinar slides. Thank you all for coming. Everybody out there, stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to having another one of these again within the next month or so. Thanks, everyone.